asking the questions mainstream journalists will never ask. This is your Richie Allen Show on richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, and triggerwarning.tv.
I'm really, really happy that my guest this evening got in touch with the programme. I really am. And kudos to him for sending me his brand new book today, which is very exciting for listeners to this programme because it deals with themes that we deal with, you and I, and talk about all the time. He believes that there are 8 tentacles of control that are wrapped around humanity. And those are the military, governmental, covert, physical, financial, media, spiritual, and scientific. That is what they are. And he's written a book about it. He was heavily influenced by John Perkins, the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John's been on this programme many times. In fact, I met John along the road back about 10 or so years ago. Now, his own story is very interesting. He has worked in the mortgage industry in Las Vegas real estate, and presumably there he saw a lot and witnessed a lot of fraud and began to maybe understand the economic system and what it can do to people. So he's written a book called The Octopus of Global Control. It's a humorous book, very controversial in parts, and it's available at all good online retailers. It is The Octopus of Global Control. Let's welcome to the programme Charlie Robinson. Charlie, you're very welcome. How are you?
I'm great, Richie. How are you doing?
I'm really well. Thanks for rushing back across town to get home to do this today. We could have done it next week, but I'm really glad that you did and you're here. And congratulations on the book. Thanks for sending it to me. I've had a speed read of the first few chapters today. It's excellent. I'm delighted you sent it to me, and I'm delighted to be talking to you. Tell us about that career in real estate in Las Vegas, Charlie, and how that influenced your thinking in terms of how you began to see the world around you, your own country, geopolitics and finance. Tell us about that.
Well, first I'd like to say that it's a pleasure to speak to Manchester because you are the home of 2 of my favorite bands in the world, the Smiths and Oasis. So
get in.
I'm grateful for that. I grew up in the Palm Springs area. You probably don't know where that is, but you will know that it is right near Coachella. So I have a fond affection for Manchester. So the way it started for me was that I worked in new home sales in Las Vegas during the boom, 2003 to 2012, and it was madness. We saw all kinds of things. If you've seen The Big Short or you've read the book The Big Short by Michael Lewis, you'll understand. I was living that. And everything was fine up until a point, but there was a time in which the sales stalled out, and I worked for a new home builder.
Charlie, forgive me for interrupting, Charlie. I'm going to disconnect the call and reconnect it because there's an annoying buzzing noise on there, and it might clear itself. In fact, it's nearly gone there now. I think it's gone, Charlie.
I unplugged my headset and plugged it back in.
All right, it's back again. So I'm going to disconnect from you just momentarily and then reconnect. My apologies for this. That noise would eventually get on. Well, I won't swear. So we'll give him a quick call back, and hopefully, he's right, Charlie.
Any better?
I think it's still there, but it's not as noticeable as it was before. So okay. It's going to work. Sorry about that. You were telling us. You talking about The Big Short, which I did read. I read as well as saw the film. This is very interesting. What you noticed working in mortgages in Vegas. Go ahead, back to that.
Sure. I sold new homes, and as we stalled out with the sales, the management decided that they would come up with a scheme to kickstart sales. So they had what they called incentive money. Think of it like a bucket of money. We were selling $500,000 houses. We'd have $100,000 of incentive money to play around with. I could just take that for a buyer and wipe it right off the price of the house, make it $400,000. Or we could use it for closing costs or buying down their interest rates. And all those things are normal and legal and fine. But when that wasn't enough, and when the loan program started disappearing, in order to get people qualified, we had to get creative with the ways to spend this money. So if a husband and wife came in, wanted to buy the house, but they had too much debt and didn't qualify, we would take that $100,000 bucket of money, pay off both their credit cards, pay off their car payments, and then rerun them through the system and see if they qualify. and magically they would, because they wouldn't have any debt anymore. So that is illegal. That's mortgage fraud. And I raised my hand during the sales meeting and asked my boss if he had cleared this through our legal department. And I'll never forget his answer. It was, "I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission."
Wow.
And we just went, oh shit, we're in trouble. Now I have a real estate license at stake. So did everyone else in that room. So I had a problem with that. And I said something about it. And I was dismissed, of course. I was sort of marginalized there, and then later fired for something unrelated, which was not a reason to get fired, but we knew what it was about. So I watched that. So about the same time this is happening, I'm reading John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and I'm starting to understand that there's a global scam being run where the IMF and the World Bank will enslave these third world countries. They'll approach them and say, hey, we can loan you money to build a hydroelectric power plant in your country. Think of all the benefits. You'll have electricity. Your kids will be able to read at night because there will be power to the homes. It'll create jobs, all of this stuff. Now, that money never actually flows from the IMF and World Bank to the country. It goes to Bechtel, Halliburton,
yes,
multinational engineering firms like that. So they build these power plants with the knowledge that they will never pencil out. There will never be enough revenue to cover the debt. So once it's finished and the revenue isn't enough to cover the debt, they approach these people. They approach these governments much like a loan shark and say, there's a lot of money you owe us, and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to pay us. So maybe we can work something out. Instead of breaking your legs with a baseball bat, why don't you vote our way in a UN resolution? Or why don't you privatize your lumber industry and allow my friend to buy it from you? Or why don't you, allow the U.S. to build a military base? So I saw that scam. John Perkins described it and then spent the better part of 20 years apologizing for it and in trying to redeem himself by helping those indigenous people, which I think is fantastic. So as I'm reading his book, I'm sort of living a smaller version of that in Las Vegas. And
You are living a smaller version, but this is amazing stuff, Charlie. I'm so glad you're here to talk about this. This is huge, and it's very pertinent right now to listeners. We've thousands and thousands of listeners in the Republic of Ireland who are going through this. It's incredibly pertinent now. So what you were seeing then was regular folks like you and me, being used by a third party basically to acquire land, to acquire properties. They were using people basically who couldn't really afford mortgages, who were going to get into trouble. Financial institutions were using them to accrue property. You were witnessing this.
Oh yeah, I was involved in. I remember a guy that came in and was trying to buy a house with his wife, and he literally was a guy that picked oranges. And I remember pulling him aside and saying, I know you qualify for this house, but I don't think you should buy this house. I mean, I was shooting myself in the foot, but I just couldn't. I knew where it was going. I could see that this was going to be a problem. You're talking about adjustable rate mortgages, and they said, well, they'll adjust it at some point, maybe. No, they're going to adjust. They're going to adjust. They never explained the fine points to you. And it was a time bomb. And then at the time, it's a little difficult to understand how it's all going to play out. I felt like I had a better understanding of it, but now looking back, it's crystal clear. What happened to those houses? They got foreclosed on. The banks took possession of them, and then the hedge funds came in and bought them from the banks for 10 cents on the dollar. So now you've got Goldman Sachs, which is one of the largest owners of rental properties in the country, and that's not by accident. It's a scheme. They designed it. And another thing to remember is that the way these mortgages were done, the company that created the actual mortgage for a person never intended to hold on to it and service it. The minute that the person closed on that house and that mortgage became real, it was packaged off to Wall Street. And that's where you get for the Big Short. They explain that in detail, how all those mortgages were pooled into ones. They slapped a AAA rating on them, which was total baloney. And then they were sold off to investors. And in Goldman Sachs' case, with the Abacus Fund, sold off to investors, and then Goldman Sachs bet against it. So I mean, it was like a rigged carnival game with the most crooked carnival in town. And
the banks committed massive fraud, because as we saw in the Republic of Ireland, The bank issued mortgages they should never have issued. Then they took an insurance policy out against the mortgage going bad. So they took property. First of all, the bank didn't take any risk because they invented the loan out of thin air. They invented the money out of nothing. The money was loaned into existence, so they took no risk whatsoever. So not only have they taken a property now, which is an asset, a physical asset, but they've also gone to an insurance company and they've claimed on the defaulted mortgage. Charlie, this is evil beyond belief, and it's happening still today. And it's so important we're talking about this tonight. Your conscience, Charlie, couldn't allow you carry on and tell people, because you knew these people were going to get into horrendous situations. Marriages were going to break up. People were going to commit suicide, right? I mean, terrible stuff.
Yeah. I was a salesperson. I was on commission. I was commission based 100%, but I couldn't do it. I just had a hard time. I saw these people with their families. They were so excited. They were moving in, and we would see loan programs disappearing day after day after day. And it just became, well, where do we stick them? Let's find a program. And that's a bad sign. And I think that the media was a huge role in this because they fueled this. Got to get your house. You don't want to be too late. And the home builders themselves did as well. On the brochures that we would hand out to people, there might be little stickers on it that would say, 5% price increase on June 30th. And you'd go, oh my God, that's 3 weeks from now.
Wow.
So that's like chumming the water for investor sharks, because they came out and said, well, if I can get 5% in 3 weeks, how many can I buy? And they would buy a dozen. I sold 13 houses in one day. It was insane. And you started to realize how unsustainable it was. And I myself bought a house, got foreclosed on. So I wasn't immune from this. I was drinking the Kool-Aid to a certain extent. And I feel bad for the people that I sold houses to, but I also want them to know that I did it to myself as well. I was a believer. I was coming from Southern California, where the prices were double or maybe triple what they were in Las Vegas, and I thought, well, yeah, these prices are going up, but they're still nowhere near Southern California, so there's still more room. And I sold myself on that
Charlie, you're I don't know you very well, but I believe you're a nice guy, and I want to talk just briefly before we do. I'm going to mention this several times. I've begun reading this book today, folks. I'm not going to lie. I never lie. I haven't completed it because I received it today. That's not Charlie's fault, by the way. I asked Charlie to come on today, and he sent me the book immediately. It's a gripping read. It's The Octopus of Global Control by Charlie Robinson. I will tweet links to where you can get it. I'm recommending that you read this book if you can. It's really important stuff. Charlie, just before we go on and we talk about how you deal with the realisation, and again you talk about the tentacles, you have the media, of course, the financial institutions, we'll come to that. Greed can affect everybody, Charlie. I don't believe that I would have done any different initially if I was in your situation. I can't stand these holier than thou people who are critical. Look, we all have needs. We all have financial needs. We all have families. We all have bloody debt, all of us. If I'm in that situation back in the day, it was like the California, it was like the Wild West gold rush. I would have done it. And what I'm trying to say is, we look at the brokers now and the mortgage agents and people like yourself, and we maybe condemn them, we maybe criticise them, but they're human beings, and we all have frailties. We're all fallible, and I'm sure some pretty good people just got caught up in it, got caught up in earning the fast money, and lost their sense of morality, even if it was only for a short time. But they're not evil. That's the point I'm making, I suppose, because there will be people listening to this and they'll be saying, Richie, come on, Charlie, he played his part in all of this. But we're all fallible. We're all capable of doing wrong and getting excited and caught up in the gold rush. That was my point. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I do have a responsibility in it for sure. I was working my ass off. I wasn't sitting back, just letting it come to me. I believed in it. I was selling homes. I was watching things take off. I was watching the construction go crazy. Las Vegas is a fantastic place to live. There's no state income tax. The weather's great. You have people from all over the country moving there. There's plenty to do. The best restaurants. There's a lot to love about it. And the pricing got a bit out of control, but the pricing was getting out of control everywhere. So it wasn't limited to Las Vegas. And once it turned, I realized, This is bad. And I think a lot of the people that I sold houses to are going to be in a bad spot. And I felt really bad about that for a long time. And like I said, I lost my house. I lost 2 houses, in fact, to foreclosure. And
how difficult was that, Charlie? How difficult is it to come to terms with that? Because, it's been a while since we've had somebody on the program who's had to cope with the trauma of that happening. And it's embarrassing and it's traumatic and it's devastating. How do you deal with it?
I got fired, lost my house, and got divorced all within the same 6-month period. So it was a bit rough. I think one of the reasons that I was able to deal with it was because I knew I didn't intentionally do this to people. I knew that I had come into it with the best of intentions. I'd stayed close with a lot of my buyers, and I had a lot of them that stayed friends afterwards. And they knew, like, listen, I'm a big boy. I bought this house. You didn't sell me anything I didn't necessarily want. And I never lied to people about it. I was always upfront. So I witnessed it, but I have a lot of guilt about that. And so part of the book came about because I felt an obligation to do my part. And so what I did with it was, the format of the book is that I brought in quotes from 500 different people, so professionals, people that had a hand in some of the most important events in world history. People like, of course, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, but also David Icke and George Carlin and Bill Hicks and people like that. So between, the topics I covered, I brought in the quotes from people to back up what I was saying, and then I added my dark sense of humor to sort of keep people hanging in there through maybe the depressing parts. Because let's face it, some of the things that we talk about, some of the things that you discuss on your show are a bit dark.
Very dark.
But that doesn't mean we shouldn't ignore them. We shouldn't pretend like they don't exist. We don't have to dwell on them, but we do have to be aware of them. So my feeling was, if I can make it, if I can make people laugh in the book, keep them hanging in there a little bit longer, then they'll get through it, because I think it's important. It was, I can't express to you how influential David Icke was in me writing this book. He turned me on to a lot of ideas and concepts that I was unaware of, and then I filled in the gaps by reading other people's work and by listening to people. I mean, I've been a listener of your show for years and years, and I'd like to thank you, by the way. Through listening to your show, I've been introduced to the work of, and then gotten to know a little bit, Dean Henderson.
Oh, Dean, of course.
Guy.
Yeah, great guy.
And John Hamer as well. John Hamer sent me his books, and we've traded books between the three of us, and oh my God, those guys, I mean, I would have never heard of them if it hadn't been for your show. So
this is amazing, Charlie, and I'm sure David Icke would be thrilled and flattered to hear you say that. I'm not surprised to hear you say that. This is so when you began to see the bigger picture, then, because it's a horrifying reality when you realize that this misery, and it didn't affect tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, it destroyed millions of lives. And when you began to see that it was part of a plan, it was the privatization, it was taking ownership of houses, of homes, by massive financial institutions, was that when you began to look at geopolitical events and things with a different eye? Was that the turning point for you?
Absolutely. John Perkins' book made me start to look at it as a global. I thought that what was happening in the United States was an isolated event, that maybe just a product of a wave of a couple things hitting all at once. Low interest rates, stimulated economy, fueled by the media. I just thought that maybe, I didn't realize that it was actually a pre-planned bubble expansion, then contraction. And then once I started to learn about the Federal Reserve Bank and understood that the financing mechanism for the globalists is are all the central banks, and how they inflate bubbles, then pop bubbles in order to take back physical, tangible assets, I realized this is the most evil game I've ever seen, and I wanted to know more about it. Never with the intention of actually writing a book. My intention was just to know more about it, and I had a sort of, a typical conversation with my mother when I discovered some new aspect of this, and I told her about it, and she said, "This is great. What are you going to do with all this information that you have?" And I didn't know. I said, "I don't know. I didn't know I had to do anything with it." So it was one of those simple questions that stumped me, and so I realized, well, I think maybe I'm pretty good at compiling information, So I set about to do that. I wrote the book in total secrecy in the middle of the night while my wife was asleep. She didn't know I even wrote it. When she found out I wrote it, she had accidentally intercepted the first batch of books that came.
Wow.
Opened up the box and promptly threw me out of the house for 2 days.
Wow. Do you know what? I'm thinking, Charlie, she might also have said to you, "Oh, you did very well to keep that a secret. What else are you keeping secret?"
Well, I said I don't have a secret life. I don't have another family in Utah. You should be happy about this. She said, "Get out."
But you delve into things, and I'm going to say this, and I don't. It's very rare that I promote anything or recommend anything, but it is very well written. What I've been reading so far today, and you take on some things, and I'm always fascinated meeting people whom, when you get into false flag terror events, you get into the cheerleading of the media for never-ending war, the lack of any genuine questioning of what's going on. It's not easy to come to terms with stuff like that. And I'll ask you a question I ask everybody whom has done something like you've done. How do you come to terms with realising that there are people, there are institutions in your own country that are capable of murdering people, blaming it on somebody else to further an agenda? Because it's Alice in Wonderland stuff, Charlie. It's not easy to deal with that.
No, it's horrifying when you realize that. It really tests your love for humanity. You just go, God, is everybody? I mean, what's the point? Where are we living? Are we on? Am I living on another planet? I never knew this. I never had this. I don't operate like that. I can't imagine being somebody that seeks out, to hurt other people intentionally for their gain. It was so foreign to me. And then one of the things I realized that I had to do in the book was I had to make sure there was a positive ending to it. I had to remind people, hey, listen, we have the numbers here. This is insane for us to think that we're helpless here, that the game's over. It's not over. We have the numbers. We are awakening. People are starting to do something about this. That's a good thing. These people that are in control count on our ignorance. They have to, because there are so many of us and so few of them. They have to control us through the media. They have to control us through money. And I got to give them credit. They've been doing a damn good job of it. But if we forget, or if we get lulled into thinking that it's over, the game's over, and we can't win, then we've walked right into their trap, because that is not the case. The awareness of these things is the first step. And then remembering that there's always the option that we can always say, we do not comply. We do not comply with your illegal orders. We will not go to war and fight people that have done nothing to us.
Charlie, hold that thought about non-compliance, because it's one thing for military men and women to non-comply, which obviously is hugely important, but it's another thing for people in communities not only to not comply with illegal and wrongful legislation, but also to support their neighbours when their neighbours do not comply. And I want to talk about that in a minute. Before we get to that, there has been some questions for you. Of course, there are some good questions. One or two listeners have tweeted me about cyclical crashes. That these crashes, they tend to come every 7 or so years, and that each one tends to be worse than the financial crash that preceded it. Do you see that? Do you think even that we're on the verge of another massive financial crash, another one of these crash the economy and then grab all the assets that you can to pay for it? Do you think that's imminent?
I think it is, and I also think it's used for two reasons. One, it's to accumulate all the assets, but it's also used as a massive distraction for what's really going on in the world. Where you see these people that are starting to come to light about the pedophilia, the Pizzagate and things like that, politicians behaving badly. They will always keep a trick up their sleeve, which is to create something that causes a distraction to take your attention away from focusing on what they've been doing wrong. A financial meltdown is a perfect one, but it accomplishes a couple goals. It takes assets away from the common people. it puts them in the hands of the banking industry, and it also creates a distraction away from some of the other problems that are going on. So yeah, I unfortunately see that in the future. It's setting up like that. You've got a stock market that's out of control. Housing market in the United States is booming like crazy. This is like 2007 all over again. If you know what to look for, you can take a step back, be objective, and see that something big is coming. I take no pleasure in saying that. I wish I didn't feel that way, but unfortunately, that is how I feel.
Yeah, you're not fear-mongering at all. You're just calling it the way you see it, and you're not the only one. I mean, financial experts, economists have been on this program over the last 18 months saying the same thing. Charlie Robinson is our guest. His book is The Octopus of Global Control. That's The Octopus of Global Control. It's available at good online retailers. Yes, Amazon is one of those. I'll tweet a link out to it. I recommend that you check this out. How many times when writing the book were you scratching your head thinking, I shouldn't have to be writing this or saying this? Fox, CNN, BBC, Channel 4 News, Reuters, they should be dealing with this stuff, not me. How many times did you think that?
Oh, well, I gave up on them. They're just not to be trusted. I have no expectation from them. So I think early on, that was one of the first things I learned was about the utter corruption in the media. How they, if you remember, a couple days after 9/11 on CNN, the news host said that a hijacker's passport was found blocks away from World Trade Center, if you can believe that.
Pristine.
And it was as if he couldn't believe the words were coming out of his mouth. I mean, no, we can't believe that. We should. How dare you try and pass that off as truth? It's insulting. So I understood pretty early on that if this information is going to get out, it's not going to come from the mainstream media. It's going to come from the alternative media. And you can tell that you guys are having a huge impact by how YouTube and Facebook and Twitter are throttling you. Because if you weren't a threat, they would leave you alone. So the fact that you're getting all of this negative attention from them, although it is frustrating and annoying and financially impacting you guys, it's also a very good sign. It means that you're doing something right that's making them very nervous.
So Charlie, on that point, do you think Facebook, YouTube and Google's efforts might be counterproductive? Because while they'll have some immediate success in demonetizing channels, which they have done, but what it might do is it might actually divert or direct people towards us, because people might say, why are they going after these guys? They must be saying something interesting. Do you think that's a possibility?
That's exactly what I think. I think they've overplayed their hand. They're going to look back on this as a huge disaster for them. They're drawing more attention to it. If they really want it to go away, they should ignore it and pretend like it's not there. But by making a big deal and being the arbiter of fake news, Facebook's going to hire 20,000 people to tell you what's real and fake news. Give me a break. That's straight out of George Orwell, 1984, Ministry of Truth. I mean, this is, you couldn't make it up. So they're going to look back on this as being a colossal business failure, and you're seeing people, sites like CNET and DTube and rising up out of this, servicing a need and blossoming, and they should, and good for them, because they're doing what these social media networks should have been doing that aren't, and they're controlled. Then we have to understand that Facebook and Google received financing from InQtel, which is it's DARPA's venture capital fund. So they had seed money coming from the spy agencies to begin with. So we really shouldn't act all that surprised that they're being used as a tool. That was the intent. They wouldn't have invested the money if they didn't have plans for them.
Yeah, the benefits that they tell you about in their lovely commercials are not the real reason these things come about or come to be. It's the stuff they're not telling you. This is really important. You take on the education system in the book. Now, this is hugely important, and it's something that comes up on this program all the time. There's a wonderful story, Charlie, on BBC News today. You wouldn't have heard me talk about this because you were racing across town, under the speed limit, by the way, but racing across town nonetheless to get back to do this. But there was a wonderful story on the BBC today about how children in the States, in fact, if I can just scroll back up, I might be able to figure out which state it is. It might have been It might have been the city of New Orleans, actually. It might have been. But no, it's Louisiana. Children are telling their teachers in schools, young children, 7 and 8, that the invention they wish had never been invented was the mobile phone, was the cell phone, because it's getting in the way of their quality time with their parents, because their parents are always on the phone. This is a wonderful thing. They've asked these children to come up with the invention they wished had never been invented, and the children are saying cell phones because their parents are always on the phones. Parents are responding to this by saying, Jesus, we never knew just how bad it is, how often we're on these bloody devices. A wonderful thing. So that's a positive story coming out of Louisiana. But on the other side of it, there's a lot to be concerned about right now in terms of what's being given to and what's being told to our children in schools. And I know you take this on in the book, and this is, if you want to call it the hidden hand or the elite or the cabal, education is a big thing for them in terms of doing what it is they want to do and imposing this on us. They start in the schools. Tell us more about that, Charlie.
Yeah, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, you had Rockefeller and Carnegie heavily financing the school system. So there must be something that happens when you make more money than you know what to do with. You get to the point where you want to have some say in the educational system. Now, they weren't doing this to benefit humanity. They were doing this to create a race of workers for them, which is why you have classrooms with desks that are set in straight lines, and you have the ringing of the bell when it's time, when the class is over, when school's over. It's to create a factory mentality. And they teach these kids from starting from kindergarten all the way through high school to respond to a bell, very Pavlovian, and then then they educate them in a way that keeps them, as George Carlin says, smart enough to work the machine, but not smart enough to realize how screwed they're getting. And now you take Bill Gates and his Gates Foundation and the implementation of Common Core, and you get into a whole new world of that. I know you've had Duke Pesta on many times in the show.
Duke,
I quote him in the book. He's fantastic. Common Core was set up in a way that the states would accept grant money from the Obama administration, but it was contingent upon them implementing Common Core. If they decide later that they don't want Common Core, they have to pay that money back. So they're stuck. You've got school systems that are broke to begin with, so they're not in a position to give money back if they've taken it. So you have them implementing Common Core, and Common Core there's only one logical way to a conclusion to come to, and that it is designed to confuse kids. If you ask a kid what 3 times 4 is, and the kid says 12, they'll get it wrong unless they show their work, unless they show 1,100 steps to come to an answer. If they come to an answer and the answer's 11, which is wrong, they'll get partial credit because they're interested in the process of how that works. Now, think about how difficult school is for a kid under the best circumstances, how stressful and traumatic. And then you add the fact that 3 times 4 is 12, and you get that marked wrong, and you get the kids are coming home crying and they don't want to go to school anymore. You have to wonder, why is that? It's by design. It's to screw up the kids to the point
scrambling the brain, Charlie.
Scrambling their brains, yeah, and creating doubt and leaving them in a position where they feel like they cannot excel at anything, creating this class of just substandard kids, and that's the next generation. And it's evil. And it's been set up by design.
And Charlie, sorry to interrupt, Charlie. At the same time, they're saying to youngsters, oh, by the way, you might not be a boy, or you might not be a girl. Did you ever think about that? And these are children, they should be kicking a football. They should be chasing a basketball, knocking a softball over the heads of their classmates, running around, chasing one another, as well as learning to read and write, full stop. But to be asking them to consider stuff like this, can you tell me this, Charlie, in your research, how aware are parents of what's going on? Let's just take the garden variety parents who's sending their child to a grade school. We call them primary schools here. How much do the parents know about what's going on in those classrooms?
Almost nothing. They're too busy working.
Yeah.
Both parents are working. They've got kids at the school. They'd love to be more involved, but they don't have the time. and they don't have the financial capacity to have one parent stay at home and be involved. If they went to the school, I had a friend who was a second grade teacher in Las Vegas, in an area of Las Vegas that was really socioeconomically deprived. She had a parent-teacher conference day, and the way they did is they scheduled it. Parents come every half hour. They have a scheduled time. She had 24 kids in her class. One parent showed up. One.
Just one. Wow.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't that they didn't love their kids. It's that they were at work, It's that they didn't have the ability to pull away for a little bit of time to meet with the teacher. And even if they did, what were they going to do about it? What were they going to say? How are they going to improve things? I mean, that was heartbreaking to me. But I don't think that's an isolated case. I think there's a lot of parents that just have said, listen, you go to school, learn as much as you can, not understanding. Nobody is explained how Common Core works. That is, not getting to the parents.
No, of course
because
not.
Once it is, they're up in arms about it. And then, of course, the whole gender identity confusion. Oh my God, I couldn't even imagine being a kid these days and having all of that. So it can be a very confusing time, I think. And so
you explained, Charlie, you explained earlier on perfectly why parents can't be aware of it, because they are one, possibly two missed paychecks away from Skid Row. It's as simple as that. I think of my close friends, like most people, you've only got maybe one or two or three really, really close friends. And I think of the people I know, they're good people, they're intelligent people, they work hard. But like me, Charlie, they've got no savings. I'm 43 years old, I have no savings. I'm not ashamed of that. Most people wouldn't admit that, but I'm not ashamed of it. I have no savings. So if things go south for me, I rely on the future Mrs. Allen. If things go south for her at the same time, we're on the street, Charlie. And that's the way most people are. This is the debt slavery that you've described brilliantly earlier on, and that you describe in the book. So of course they can't be involved in what's actually being told to their children. This is lunacy.
Yeah, you have one thing though that a lot of people do not have, and that is that you are doing something that you love, and you're very good at it. So,
thanks for that. Yeah,
that is, there's value there. I understand the stresses of that. Yeah, you're right. One thing goes bad, it's trouble
for most people, right, Charlie? I mean, you've researched this diligently. This is for most people outside of the people who work for the system, in finance and media. The rest of us are hand to mouth. I'm not poor. We're not poor. We can rent. We have the house that we rent. We put food on the table every week. There's only the two of us. We're not poor, but I think we are like most people in terms of that. If it goes bad for a couple of months, well, it's impending disaster. And you've written about this, and you are certain that this is by design. We are hooked up to this debt umbilical cord. It is debt slavery.
Yeah, and I think once people understand the mechanisms of the bank, which we're not taught, by the way, in school, once they understand that, then it becomes then they start to get it a little bit more when they realize that there's not enough money to service all of the debt out there. Not in a theoretical way, but in an actual way. The way if you go back to $0 and you create $100 and you loan it to someone at 6% interest, they have to pay you $106 the next year, and there's not that $6. So it becomes this perpetual cycle, like a Ponzi scheme or a carnival game, and it's been used. I mean, this is the reason why central banks have been thrown out of countries. Thomas Jefferson was adamant that they would destroy you, so he threw them out 200 years ago, and they came back in 1913 in the U.S. And by watching that, by understanding that this is a game, an evil game, but it's set up in a way that benefits the banks, and then witnessing the list of countries that did not have central banks and that wound up getting invaded in like one after another, it becomes very clear that there's a plan. And if you're one of the three countries now that doesn't have a central bank, like Cuba, North Korea, or Iran, you better watch yourself, because they're going to manufacture a reason to go in, demonize you, invade your country, and impose a central bank, just like they did in Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan over the last couple of years.
Charlie Robinson is our guest. We've got 10 minutes left, and I'm going to give those 10 minutes to Charlie, because there might be something he wants to talk about that we haven't yet covered. So, Charlie, think about what you might want to talk about. I just want to mention again, I've tweeted a link to the book. It is called The Octopus of Global Control. Controversial, realistic, devastating, funny as well, though. Bringing together these 8 tentacles of control that enable those responsible for the paradigm that we exist in to control us effectively. It's terrific stuff. The Octopus of Global Control. It's available at all good online retailers. Of course, Amazon, which is the most common one here in this country. I'm recommending you check it out. And the Kindle edition of it is great value. That's all I'm going to say. Great value. You might want to get on to Amazon about the price in there, Charlie, but it's good. It's good value. Listen, is there some aspect of this that you want to chat about in the 10 minutes that we have left that maybe we haven't covered yet? And it's been terrific listening so far. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I want to say that this is not some new phenomenon. This has been going on for years and years. And like I said, when I wrote the book, I brought in the quotes from people to back up what I was saying. So I want to read something. This is from a man named John Francis Hyland. He says, "The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like an octopus sprawls its slimy legs over our cities, states, and nation. To depart from mere generalizations, let me say that at the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make cat's paw of party leaders, use the leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place in nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of corrupt big business. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of the newspapers and magazines in this country. They use the columns of these papers to club into submission or drive out of office public officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government. It operates under cover of a self-created screen and seizes our executive officers, legislative bodies, schools, courts, newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection." Now that quote is from 1922.
Wow.
So almost 100 years, nothing's changed. They're still running that game. They've got control of everything, and that's how they impose this on the people.
He nailed it, Charlie. He nailed the electoral system, which is completely redundant. I'm tired of saying to people, stop getting excited about Jeremy Corbyn. Stop getting excited about Bernie. Feel the burn. Give me a break, people. When are you going to wake up to it? This is the thing, Charlie. How many more duds are going to come in talking about real change and then give you the same shit that you've been served up all your life before people realise that system has to be basically dismantled?
Well, I've got a great quote here for you that you might like. It says, "The cabal's greatest tool, the biggest power that they have is our incredulity, our conditioning to believe that certain things just can't happen." That is from Richie Allen.
Yeah, I vaguely remember saying that. Yeah. It's true. It's our incredulity, the fact that people think, no, it can't be true. They can't possibly, such a tiny cabal can't possibly control everything. But you're right, that is central, Charlie, to how it is they thrive and survive, is that people shake their heads and say, it just can't be right. But you said earlier, and please God you're right, Charlie, that increasing numbers of people are starting to think again.
Yeah. For sure. We witnessed, I think people are understanding that the politicians are puppets. They're not really the ones in charge. We had 2 of the worst candidates in the history of the United States election run for president. And so,
Ever.
Ever. And so we act surprised when we get, maybe we're getting exactly what we deserve. Maybe we don't deserve a good candidate. Maybe, I look at us on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, with all the morons lined up to beat down the doors of a Walmart to get a $3 can opener. And I think, you know what? Maybe we're getting exactly what we deserve. Maybe we haven't earned it.
That's a brilliant image. And and it's not cruel either. It's true. And those people who behave like that, they deserve our scorn. They also deserve our friendship and our help and our counsel when we can. But those sorts of activities deserve our absolute scorn. Yeah, we're drowning in a sea of identity politics. You know, it's getting more and more polarized, left versus right. On the one hand, but on the other hand, you're right. More people are starting to see, well, no, in fact, we're screwed every time, no matter what. You know, you mentioned David Icke earlier. David tells a great story about when Obama was running for president. It coincided with David being in the US. He was on the West Coast, which is obviously traditionally very liberal. It's very much democratic, socialist minded. And when he was giving a talk, he was being true to himself, and he was saying that, oh, if this Obama guy gets in, you know, you're not going to see any change at all. This is complete nonsense. This is mind control on a huge scale. And the mood went sour very quickly in the auditorium. People were disgusted. You know, they're like, What? Icke? Surely Icke should be. This is a black man, an African American. Surely Icke should see that this guy is going to bring real change. And David is like, no, but you've obviously not been reading my books for years. You know, it's not going to change things. And some people left. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because his slogan was hope.
Hope, yeah.
But there's an interesting thing about hope. Hope is always in the future. It's never in the present. You never have to actually deliver on it. As long as it's out there in the future. So it was brilliant for him. It was, of course, a fraud, but it was brilliant to put that hope out there, because as long as you have that, it's like the carrot that you're chasing, you know, but you never really have to give them that. It's always somewhere just outside of your grasp.
Yeah, it's a carrot.
A little harder.
It's a carrot on a stick that's dangling ever out of reach. Before we run out of time, we touched briefly on, and I'm so glad you brought it up, non-violent civil disobedience. We need to completely say no. But more than that, we have to start to become friendly with and engage with our immediate neighbours again, the man or woman living next door, the person across the street, because their struggles are your struggles. So if they decide not to comply, no, this tax is illegal, I'm not going to pay it, and I'm not going to bow down to your threats to repossess my car or whatever. We need to stand with people, don't we, Charlie?
Absolutely, and we have to understand that red team versus blue team mentality is set up by the people in control to keep us divided. And it works like a charm. They do it with religion, they do it with politics, because it divides us into smaller and smaller groups. And if you're in a smaller group, you feel like you don't have as much power. If everyone takes a step back and realizes that we're all on the same team here, we're all people that love our family and want the best for our future, and we want all this stuff non-violently, we realize we have a whole hell of a lot more in common than we do apart from one another. So to remember that, yeah, there's strength in numbers. There's a great scene in that cartoon movie A Bug's Life when the grasshoppers talk about stomping out the ants and saying you have to stomp them out, because if they realize they outnumber us 1,000,000 to 1, it's over for us. And that's what we need to remember.
I must grab that clip. I've not seen that film, Charlie. Presumably you've children or youngsters, so that's you got to see it. I didn't see it. That's a lovely way to leave it, but I'm going to ask you to come back. I'm going to give you a shout again in 6 or 8 weeks to get you to come back and have a chat with us if you're up for that. I am going to plug the book again, though. It is The Octopus of Global Control by Charlie Robinson. I managed to read a good 25, 30 pages this afternoon, and it is terrific. And even somebody like myself, this is important, and I've heard a lot of people on this programme and other programmes for years. There is new information, and there are new conclusions and analogies drawn by Charlie in the book that are new to me. So there's a lot of new stuff in there. Check it out. All good online retailers, The Octopus of Global Control. Thanks for your time, Charlie. I've loved having you on, and I really look forward to you coming back on again in the future. Congratulations on the book. As we say in Ireland, fair play to you for writing it and doing it, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you so much, Richie. I will be on whenever you'd like me to come back.
Brilliant stuff, Charlie. Thanks so much. That was Charlie Robinson, The Octopus of Global Control. Check it out. Available at all good online retailers, as I said now. Check it out there. Thanks to Charlie for coming on.